50,000 years ago, a child could disappear in seconds. A leopard beyond the fire, a freezing night, one infected cut, even getting separated from the group could be fatal. And yet, prehistoric children survived long enough for our species to spread across the planet, not because ancient parents never made mistakes, but because raising a child may never have been a job for two people. Imagine a small camp at the edge of a forest. The fire is still burning. Several adults have already left to search for food. Somewhere nearby, stone strikes stone. Meat is being cut. Children move between the adults, watching hands, copying movements, picking up things they probably should not touch. Among them is a toddler. Too young to find food, too slow to escape danger, unable to understand why the darkness beyond the camp matters. The obvious assumption is that the child's mother watched every step, but that would have been almost impossible. Human children remained dependent for years. Meanwhile, adults still had to gather food, carry supplies, maintain tools, process meat, and move camp. One person could not do all of it. So, in many foraging communities, care is shared. A father might carry the child. An older sibling might keep it away from the fire. A grandmother might share food. Another adult might notice when it wandered too far. Anthropologists call this alloparenting, care given by people other than the biological parents. But to the child, there was probably no special word for it. There was simply the group. Research among modern hunter-gatherer communities cannot tell us exactly how every prehistoric family lived. But it shows that children can grow up inside broad networks of caregivers. They do not depend on one perfect protector who never sleeps, never becomes sick, and never looks away. They depend on enough people being nearby. When the group traveled, the smallest children could be carried. At camp, they stayed close to the places where adults worked. At night, they slept surrounded by bodies, firelight, and familiar sounds. A child on the outside of the group was vulnerable. A child in the middle was much harder to reach, but eventually, every child had to leave that middle. At some point, it had to walk rather than be carried. It had to move beyond the fire, follow adults into unfamiliar terrain, and begin finding food for itself. Once, children started moving farther from camp. Watching them was no longer enough. They had to recognize danger for themselves. A prehistoric child needed to learn that two similar plants might not be equally safe. It had to notice which tracks were fresh, which animals were dangerous, and which sounds meant the forest had suddenly gone quiet. It needed to know where water could be found, how far it could wander, and how to return when familiar landmarks disappeared. None of this knowledge came from a classroom. It was learned while living. Children watched adults dig, cut, carry, and prepare food. They copied those actions during play. They followed older children who were closer to their size and often easier to imitate. A child pretending to hunt was not simply passing time. Play allowed dangerous adult skills to be rehearsed while the consequences were still small. Research on hunter-gatherer childhood suggests that much can be learned by watching and joining in. But when knowledge is difficult to infer, adults sometimes have to make it explicit. Do not approach that animal. Do not cross the river there. Do not sleep beyond the fire. Every warning contained a memory of an animal that attacked, a crossing that failed, or a plant that once made someone sick. By passing on the lesson, the group allowed the child to survive a danger without repeating the original disaster. Culture became a form of protection. It could outlive the person who first learned the lesson, but knowledge could not prevent everything. Children still became sick. They fell. They broke bones. Some were born with conditions that made movement, hearing, or feeding more difficult. And this is where prehistoric survival becomes more surprising. Caring for a vulnerable child was expensive. Food was limited. Travel was difficult. Every person carrying a child could carry less wood, meat, or equipment. From a purely cold calculation, a group might be expected to abandon anyone who could not keep up. But some archaeological discoveries suggest that this did not always happen. In 2024, researchers described part of the inner ear of a Neanderthal child who lived more than 100,000 years ago. The bone contained abnormalities that the researchers argued were consistent with a serious congenital condition, possibly Down syndrome. The child may have experienced hearing loss, poor balance, and repeated illness. We cannot know the child's exact condition from one small piece of bone. The interpretation remains uncertain. But we know something else. The child survived to roughly 6 years old. 6 years in a world without antibiotics, hospitals, or specialized equipment. If the researchers are right about the severity of the condition, survival may have required sustained care. Someone had to provide food. Someone had to keep the child close during movement. Someone had to help when balance, hearing, or illness made ordinary life more difficult, and the burden may have been too great for one mother alone. The child's survival may record something larger than parental care. It may record a community choosing to help. This does not prove that every prehistoric group treated every child with compassion. Prehistory was vast, and human behavior has never been uniform. But it challenges the image of ancient life as a world where only the strongest mattered. Strength may not have been what kept humans alive. Cooperation may have mattered more. At first glance, human childhood looks like an evolutionary disadvantage. Our babies are helpless. Our children grow slowly. They consume food for years before they can reliably replace what they eat. A young antelope can stand shortly after birth. A human child requires an entire childhood, but that long dependence created time. Time to learn landscapes that changed with the seasons. Time to master tools that no instinct could explain. Time to absorb language, relationships, customs, and thousands of details accumulated by earlier generations. The weakness of the individual child forced adults to cooperate. And that cooperation gave each new generation access to knowledge far older than itself. Return to the child beside the fire. It cannot hunt. It cannot find its way home alone. It may not understand what waits beyond the light, but around it are many eyes watching, many hands ready to pull it away from danger, and many minds carrying lessons learned before it was born. Prehistoric children did not survive because the ancient world was gentle. They survived because, long before civilization, humans had already begun making sure that no child faced that world alone.